Hi, welcome back to Adonai. It's Michelle, and tonight we are proceeding with our series, Uncomfortably Smooth Seasons of Transition. So we left off at part 2, and in all actuality, we are going to be here for a little bit longer. So let's deem this part 2B. Okay, quick recap. We opened in part 1 with, what's a transition? We did definitions of transition and being in, and elaborated upon being in going through seasons of transitions, changes. Part 2, we were able to actually get into that artsy fartsy track that God allowed me to hear in a new way at that point, and that's of course Barry White's So Much to Give. So we dived into the lyrics and we went through scripture to, of course, make sure that, we know God can speak to us in a multitude of ways. And so we went through the lyrics, we went through some scriptures, and if you would stay with me here again, it's going to be part 2B, because we still need to keep our spiritual lenses on just a bit longer as we, get through a few more points that he's shared with me. Okay, so keep in mind the spiritual lenses that we have on, giving love to and receiving love from God, that agape love, the highest form of love, charity, and the love of God, again, for man and of man for God, and woman, of course. All while keeping in mind, in respects to what we're going over and what we have examples of right now. And so that again is going to be the track from Barry White, So Much to Give, and of course the ultimate reason we're in discussion, and that's going to be when we find ourselves in various seasons of transition. Okay, so when I first received the song to listen to, that God allowed me to listen to it in a new way. Of course, I've been in various seasons of transition, right? Again, we can find ourselves in a singular season of transition at a time, or more than one season of transitions at a time. Again, throughout our journeys, because that's just life. It comes with it. And so when he gave me that track to listen to and listen to it in a new way, there were a few things that I was, having a few moments about. Super minor moments, but it was nice to receive the song. And like I said, it was as though he was speaking to me through Barry White, through Barry's tone, and how he didn't want me upset, and how he emphasized that he needs me to trust in him, right? And that, as the song is entitled, he has so much to give. God has so much love to give us all. And he gave me that track at a time where I did not realize it was to help what I was experiencing in that moment. But furthermore, it was also to prepare me for what was to come. right? And so now I'm sort of on the other side, or seeing it from the perspective of the aftermath of that, right? And so what's that? While in a season of transition, he ushered me into a storm. Matthew 8, verses 23 through 27. Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Adonai was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Adonai, save us. We're going to drown." He replied, "Ye of a little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." So to just highlight, a few of those key lyrics of the song, don't be afraid. Trust me. God was, reminding me to not be afraid, to trust in him, and that he has so much to give. Compounded with the scriptures that he led me to upon, again, hearing that track in a new way. He was literally, helping me with what I was going through prior to actually ushering me into a storm. So he was, helping me with that while simultaneously preparing me for something a bit tougher, something more challenging to deal with. And that right there, that's love. That's the love of God. He's going to love on you, and he's going to get you ready for what we don't expect and anticipate, right? He knows all. He has it all laid out for us. And although, again, those things can be quite challenging, those storms, he prepares us. And then again, we find ourselves in the midst of it. But as you can see, with this verse that I shared, Matthew 8:23 through 27, he's still with us even in the midst of storms. Now, in this particular one, he was sleeping on the boat. And so you may find yourself in the midst of a storm and it's like silent. God, where are you at? What's going on? And help me out here. But if we keep in mind, when the teacher is giving a test, the teacher is silent. The students have to be silent as well to focus on taking that test to be successful, right? And so, not only was it a storm, it was testing. And how was it testing? If you had a chance to check out the last video that I posted prior to this one, the love notes, a note of love on grief. I know you're probably like, girl, where have you been? And then how are you going to pop back in and give us something not next in line for, where you left off? And although it may have seemed completely, off topic and out of nowhere, being about grief, that was actually the storm that I found myself in the midst of. I experienced a tremendous loss. Someone very dear transitioned from the earth. And so it was rough. It was tough. The last few weeks have been literally a whirlwind. And so I had to stop, right? I had to stop and get quiet because I realized I was in a test. God was testing me. And not on one thing, as I reflect now, it was multiple things that he was testing me on. So if you had a chance to check that video out, if you haven't, go and do so. Of course, if you haven't listened to the first two parts of this message, definitely do that as well. But in the grief video, I spoke about how when I was younger, I would, when things would go on that would, bring about grief, because throughout our journeys on earth, we will deal with various losses and of loved ones, for example, transitioning from the earth. And so when I was younger, when those sorts of things would happen, and it could be literally, transitioning from an older season that you really loved and enjoyed, right? And that God's like shifting you, like, no, hey, it's time to grow and evolve into this. And so in order to grow and evolve into this, this version of who I need you to be, God requires for us to shed away people, places, and things. And with that comes a form of grieving as well. So not only when loved ones, when people transition from the earth, but, grief can come into play in many ways. And so, again, when I was younger and things would happen, and, I would actually need to sit still and allow myself the time to grieve, I wouldn't. I would literally keep it pushing. So I would go 10 times as hard with school, so focusing on school and work. Back then, drinking, whenever it got a bit unbearable, definitely not promoting that, but just speaking of fact on what I did. So, I would do, those things, those coping mechanisms, right? To just not deal with it, to shove it away. And all that did was cause it to fester and, beneath the surface, and eventually I would explode. So, emotionally erupt randomly out of nowhere because I didn't deal with that grief in a healthier way, right? And so a portion of this test that I realized he was placing, or a portion of the test he was administering to me, right, was, are you going to revert to your old ways? Here you are experiencing this sort of loss. And actually, that wasn't the only type of, loss that would bring about grief, but this was the major one during that time. And so, will you revert to your older ways? Will you just push your feelings aside here and bottle them up to only erupt later? Will you be tempted to grab a glass of wine when in all actuality God had me to stop drinking a couple of years ago? And so it's like, will you do that? This is a test. And so he was quiet, right? He was quiet in this point for a bit, right? And it's like, well, you have a choice. You're gonna evolve or repeat, if you've ever heard that saying. And so are you going to ignore it, focus, and go 10 times as hard with work, and on the various projects that I have you working on, and just ignore it? Or are you going to handle this in a more mature manner, right? Because grief is a part of life. Thankfully, joy comes after grief, after facing it and after trusting God and leaning on Him throughout those times and actually facing it. And so that's what I did. And throughout me taking that time to do that, that prior video, that piece, that note is something that came about. And I just felt led to share it, for anyone else who just might be in a tug of war per se with grief and with feeling the urge to lean on, that end of the spectrum of ignoring it or going to unhealthier mechanisms of coping with it. Ultimately, it's a part of life. It's something we all experience throughout our times here on the earth. But God really does want for us to lean on that healthier end of the spectrum where we don't shove those emotions away and feel through it and lean on Him and grow and evolve as a result of it, because He always does have joy waiting for us at the end. And so that was a portion or one of the exams, for instance, that I was taking throughout that time. And, I evolved per se. I did not fall into old ways. I didn't do what I did as I was younger. And so thank God for that. And so to being more so on the other side of that storm, right? And to see the perspective of this track from being on this side of the storm, I reflect on Matthew 14:22, let's go through 27. This is the King James Version. And straightway Adonai constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And then when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Adonai went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, or it was a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But straightway Adonai spoke unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And so when we, are in various seasons of transitions, and then while in these seasons of transitions, find ourselves in the midst of storms, God's still with us. And although at times He might be quiet or has stepped away for a bit, it's like, okay, what's the last thing did He tell you? Or what's the last thing did He remind you of? Because again, He reminded me and expressed so much love beforehand, before this storm that I found myself in the midst of, to remind me of His unfailing love, right? That unconditional love that He has for us. And so lean on that. And then also He will help you to recognize, okay, this is a test now. You're the student. And I'm going to be quiet for a bit because I need to know whether or not you're going to apply what I've taught you and what you learned, right? And so when you find yourself just, in the midst of those times, continue to lean on Him and don't be afraid. Again, as the track also reminds us, Don't be afraid. God has so much to give. All that we have to do is lean on and fully trust in Him. And so that is going to wrap up part 2B. Thank you so much for being here and taking a moment. If you haven't had a chance yet, definitely check out parts 1 and 2. We'll be back with part 3 soon. Until then, it's Michelle. This is Adonai and I. Blessings.